There's also a phenomenon known as affinity bias. This is basically where unconsciously we are biased towards people we are alike. Immediately, as soon as we create something or introduce something that they see likeness in, affinity bias will be at work and will immediately become more likable. So trust is a key component to success inside organizations. Rachel Botsman defines trust as a confident relationship with the unknown. Now, there's many other definitions out there, but I really like hers. It really resonates well with me because within organizations, our role as product managers are often to manage the unknown. That's one of the reasons why product is so hard. We know that there's a huge amount of uncertainty and ambiguity. We know that just because we built a feature doesn't mean people are going to use it. Just because we have this great idea doesn't mean that it is a great idea. There's a huge amount of uncertainty in product. When I was at the Royal Military College here in Australia, I was taught that trust and respect was a byproduct of competence, consistency, integrity, and putting others before yourself. As the saying goes in the military, leaders eat last, and they take that literally. You have to put others before yourself and you eat last. And that's part of your duty of care and really servant leadership in a nutshell. But it was no surprise that if you look at Rachel Botsman's work, the way that she breaks down trust has an uncanny alignment to what I learned in the military. Rachel breaks down trust into competence, reliability, integrity, and empathy. The other really popular or common formula that you see floating around trust, the trust formula as it's often referred to, is from the book The Trusted Advisor. They stated that trust or trustworthiness is equal to credibility times by reliability times by intimacy divided by self-orientation, or also known as self-interest. You can see that these two start to map together. Well, all three of these start to map together. And there's no surprise there, right? Trust has pretty standard or common components to it. So the way that I then distill all of this down into trust is a byproduct of competence or credibility, whatever you want to name it, AKA, are you able to do the job and are you able to do the job well? Are you able to do it independently and do it well? Reliability, or another word to use here is consistency. Do you chop and change all the time? Are you reliable? When you say you're going to do something, do you do it? Do you change your mind all the time? Do you get angry 1 minute and then you're, really relaxed and calm the next minute? How consistent and reliable are you? And integrity. So do you do the right thing? Or as defined in The Trusted Advisor, they say intimacy. And the way that intimacy is designed is things like if you're presented with sensitive information, do you keep that to yourself? Do people feel safe to share personal information with you, like their doubts, their insecurities, because they can trust that you're going to keep that information between them, or do you not? And then the last one being empathy, right? So reframing your own, putting others before you, and self-orientation to empathy. In other words, do you actually care about others? Do you act in a way which puts others' needs before your own, or do you act in a selfish way? Selfishness is always going to erode trust, and helping others and people being able to see you as somebody who's there to truly care about them and truly empathize with them and truly try to help them as much more trustworthy. I like to think of these as really just pillars of trust. So 4 pillars that make up trust. So the first pillar is competence. This one I view as a foundational pillar that kind of underpins everything. You kind of need to have it first before the other ones can be true. And this is because if somebody is not deemed as competent, even if you have all the other pillars of trust, it's going to be very hard to trust them with the thing because you just don't trust that they're competent enough to do it. Now, as product managers, we need to be perceived as competent in our role, or otherwise there's no reason to trust us. And this is where we will struggle with things like being empowered and all those types of things. Now, there's really only 4 key levers that you can pull in order to be seen as more competent in your job. These are about how you project yourself, which we're going to break it down. It's basically going to be broken down into your confidence and your demeanor. There's your knowledge and understanding of what's happening and the situation, making data-informed decisions, and then making the impact of your work more transparent and visible. So diving into the first one, how you go about projecting yourself. Now, there's a really interesting phenomena that happens around competence and how we are perceived as being competent. In fact, research has suggested that it actually doesn't matter whether you're actually competent or not. So hear me out. There was a study done in 1982 that explored the connection between confidence and the perceptions of competence. Two psychologists, they asked 48 subjects to rate a person's competence. It was essentially a fictional character. Among other characteristics, or hiding it within other characteristics, there were 60 imaginary people who were facing a hypothetical challenge. The challenge was either a tennis tournament that they were competing in, or it was a class final exam. The participants received two crucial pieces of information. The first one was that they learned what the imaginary person predicted their performance to be, and then they also got what their actual performance was. After those two pieces of information, they were asked to rate each of these imaginary people's competence. What was really interesting was not only did the study find that there was a correlation between how confident they basically were about their own performance. So those who said that their performance was going to be really high translated to a high perception of people perceiving them as competent. But what was really interesting was that they actually had access to the person's actual scores. So whilst the participants evaluated those imaginary people who predicted themselves to perform well as more competent to their modest counterparts who predicted themselves to perform moderately or poorly, they actually had access to the actual scores, and they did this despite the actual performance. You would think that you would look at the actual performance and then use that as a measure of working out whether the person was competent or not. But in fact, participants didn't. Regardless of whether they actually performed well or not, those who predicted their performance to be higher scored higher than those who didn't. In fact, those with an optimistic forecast but a horrible result were still rated almost twice as competent as those who predicted their performance to be poor. Although this specific study has been debated, it has been replicated in recent years with similar results, supporting the notion that confidence projects competence, despite how we actually end up performing. This is because it will take us a long time to work out whether somebody is actually competent or not. And there's moments where we need to trust that someone is going to do the right thing, or what they say is what we should do. You know, you see a line, they're like, don't move. You need to trust that what they're saying to you is the right thing. How do I know you're competent? I can't say, well, show me your credentials. Are you a lion trainer, or are you a zoologist or something like that? No, we need to be able to perceptually work out whether they are competent or not. And what research has found is that confidence acts as that proxy to competence. So when somebody comes across as highly confident, what we often do is associate that confidence with competency. Now, unfortunately, this is a common tool that scam artists and frauds use in order to trick you into thinking that they are highly competent and that you should trust them. They come across as really confident, like, yes, you'll do this and you'll get that, and all those types of things. Of course, we want to actually be competent in our roles, but understanding how confidence plays a role in projecting competence can help us build those stronger relationships and build stronger trust with our stakeholders. So it's worth reflecting here about how naturally confident are you? Are you a naturally confident person, or are you more on the reserve side? Is there opportunities to maybe adjust the way that you communicate and the way that you project yourself to be more confident inside those stakeholder engagements, inside meetings when you're working with stakeholders, in the way that you communicate to them, whether that's written or even verbally? If this is a weak point for you, I'd encourage practicing, trying to get more practice into communicating. A few things that have helped me over the years around communicating and being more clear and concise and more confident in the way that I communicate. And the first one is obviously communicating more often. Recording myself. So these types of things through speaking engagements and everything, I've always found that my speaking has gotten better and I communicate more clearly. And even doing all these videos and doing this has always improved it, because I have to go back and watch myself. And you pick up on all these things that you don't realize in the moment, but then you're watching yourself and you realize that, hey, I do this and that. And then you start to become more conscious of it, and you can improve and try to remove them. And you can see whether they're still happening in future videos. Now, obviously you can sit in a room at home and you can record yourself talking. Another thing that you can do is there's some great talking apps out there that you can also get that are going to help you. And another thing that I did, especially with all the conference talks that I do, is I got a speaking coach. So obviously a speaking coach is probably the best thing that you can get. They can help you, they can give you feedback and review and give you tools and tricks around how you communicate. Obviously there's a high budget involved in that. And obviously I was speaking at a lot of conferences, and that just makes a lot of sense for me. From a personal development point of view, but something that's worth considering if communicating is a weak point for you. Because the way that you project yourself and whether you come across as confident or not is going to have a huge impact on whether they perceive you as being competent or not. Interestingly enough, based on that research, more so than actually being competent. So that's a really interesting thing. And that's the one thing I want you to really take away from this. So confidence is going to be a very important lever here for projecting competence. So your next lever here for projecting more confidence is going to be knowledge and understanding. It goes without saying that in order to be competent, we need to have a good foundational knowledge and understanding of what is happening around us. Therefore, we need to be investing into learning more about our product, the market, our customers, the technology it uses, the business, and all of those types of things. It's worth creating a learning backlog here. This is something that I get you to do inside the first 90 days course, because the whole first month inside the first 90 days of starting a new role is all dedicated to learning. That's how important knowledge and understanding is. So what we do is we create a backlog of all the things that we believe that we need to learn. This could be things about our product, about the business, about the market, about other teams, about the company and its processes, about competitors, all of those types of things. We brainstorm and create a big backlog of things that we need to know. We then go through a structured exercise about asking ourselves why we need to know that. And then we start to break down how we're going to learn those things. What are the ways and avenues that we can learn more about that thing? Now, because you're not starting a new role, you already have a foundational knowledge about the company and those types of things. It's still worth pausing and basically reflecting, what are the things that you need to know more about? Where are perhaps your gaps in knowledge? And then again, doing the same kind of structure of why do I need to know it? And then who and how am I going to get that information? Now, I don't want you to take this as needing to know everything or having the answers to every single question. You can't know everything. That's just fact. And you don't want to be a know-it-all either. And we want to show a level of humility and self-awareness that we can put our hands up when we know that we don't know something. So don't think that in order to be seen as competent, you need to be able to answer every single question that gets thrown at you. But there's a big spectrum between answering every question and then being able to answer no questions or not having any understanding of what's happening around you. What we need to be striving for is enough understanding that we can engage meaningful in conversations on a regular basis with our stakeholders. So when they start talking about the business or we start talking about how our product fits within the business, we should be able to articulate that. We should be able to engage in that type of conversation. This is what's going to project that competency. Something else that's going to come up a lot in conversations is being able to remind your stakeholders things like your value proposition, the product roadmap, your product strategy, the data that led you to be able to make that decision. If we can say things with conviction, like, no, we made this decision because of A, B, and C reasons, that's going to make you seem more competent. So that conviction is only going to come through understanding. I'm only confident in my answer because I have this wealth of knowledge and understanding around the topic. So build up that base of knowledge and understanding. So spend some time reflecting on some of the knowledge gaps you might have across your role, the capabilities that you need to be successful in that role, things like your strategy, maybe even product skills like discovery and customer interviewing, market value proposition, market analysis, those types of things. These could also be things about your product. What are the data to support certain decisions? What's the tech behind it? Could even be about the company, the business model, how it works, company processes, who owns what, how your product fits within the broader company, those types of things. If you are after a list as a starting point and you're struggling to come up with a list yourself, here are some of the things that I would be wanting to understand to enough detail that I can basically regurgitate and quote in any given moment. This is in no particular order. Of course, the product vision, your strategy, the current outcomes that you're chasing, the OKRs, the target market, your target customers, their needs, their behaviors, of course, at a high level, current product health, how is the product performing, the current challenges that it's facing, how the product works, the top themes of product feedback that you're facing right now. Who are your major competitors? What are some of those market and industry trends? What's upcoming on your roadmap? What the team's obviously working on right now and the rationale behind it. Like what led you to that decision to be working on that thing? how the product fits in the wider organization, and how it supports your overarching business model. Now, the last aspect of knowledge and understanding is to be a lifelong learner. Continuous learning and being able to stay up to date with industry trends, best practices, emerging technologies, even things about your own profession is going to project more competence. This could be attending conferences, taking courses like this one, which is fantastic. So you're doing that, reading more publications or blogs or books around your role in the profession, but being able to reference things to say, yeah, I heard about this thing at that conference, or I went to this conference recently. All of those things are going to project more competence for you in your role because you're seen as somebody who is highly competent in it because you're going and doing all these things. The product people that aren't doing all these things, that aren't learning about this, aren't learning about that, don't have a knowledge outside of their organization, are always going to struggle to show the same level of competency that you will with all of this outside knowledge and this wealth of knowledge around the role and how it works in other companies and this book and that book and things that you've learned from conferences, etc. There's a saying about people that we often refer to people as being well-read. Well-read just means that they come across as somebody who just has this really wide and breadth range of understanding. And it's not impossible to achieve this. You can achieve this just by reading and attending more things than the average person. And this will portray a level of intelligence. And as a consequence of that, will portray you as more competent. So if you're not already, I highly encourage to attend conferences, go to meetups, read more books, read blogs. You're already doing this course, so that's fantastic. So do more of those types of things. Doesn't need to be my course, can be any course out there. The more you learn about your role, the better you'll get in your role. So there's that benefit as well. But then the other side of the fence will be the more competent you'll be perceived as in your role. After competence, our next pillar is consistency. Consistency is critical to trust because we trust people who are more consistent and predictable more. We tend to associate that with trustworthiness. When people aren't predictable, it's hard to trust them. Much like how confidence is a proxy for competency, consistency is a proxy for reliability. Trust requires us to rely on someone else. That is the notion of trust. And if somebody isn't reliable and they don't come across as reliable, it's hard to fully trust them. So we think about our behavior with our stakeholders and their ability to trust us and see us as reliable. We need to be consistent with them. Consistency can come in many different forms. This might be following through with something that you said you would do, or consistency of meetings. Do you constantly cancel meetings? Or consistency in how we communicate. If you said that you're going to send out week notes every week, do you send them out every single week? All these things are going to affect how consistent and subsequently how reliable and trustworthy you are perceived as by your stakeholders. So let's dive into some of the ways that I like to try to be more consistent. The first one is defining clear principles or defining clear boundaries about how you're going to work. By defining how you like to work, you can then have confines and a structure that you then decide to stick to. In particular, some of the ways that you're going to communicate. This is something we talked about earlier in the style conversation about being clear about how you like to work and also being clear about how your stakeholders like to work so you can take that on board and you can adapt your communication style to theirs. But this is where an element of consistency starts. For example, a structure that I talked about previously in that style conversation is that I like to check my emails only twice a day. Once at the start of the day, at the beginning, when I'm prepping my day and getting ready for the day's work, and one right at the end when I'm winding down and closing the day. By having this communication structure, I can be consistent with how I respond and how quickly I reply to emails. So I am responding to emails basically during those time periods, which means for the most part, I'm responding to emails within 24 hours. And that is the expectation that I then set with my stakeholders. And then I try to keep that expectation. So one, there's consistency through tone of voice and how you actually go about communicating and the words that you use and the way that you say things. But there's another part which is about the medium in which we choose to communicate. So my preference is to use chat-based communications, and I reserve emails for things that are going to require large portions of text, meeting invites, and anything that probably just doesn't fit or work inside chat-based communication. Now, of course, I'm going to adapt my needs to my stakeholders. So if they prefer email, I would then adapt to that and I would then email them. But this is again that consistency. We sat down in our style conversation. We agreed that email was their preferred method, and I would use email as a primary means to communicate with them. I then remain consistent in how I communicate by emailing them and not, sending them a chat message. A way that I can frame this, and this is probably going to resonate with a lot of you. There's nothing worse, and I'm sure most of you have been in this situation, where things are lost between all kinds of different tools and mediums. You're trying to find a message or a link that somebody sent you, and you can't remember whether they sent it via email or whether they sent it via a Slack message or chat-based message, or maybe they put it inside Yammer or, Workplace by Facebook, those types of tools, or whether it was a file or whether it was a Notion page or Confluence page or some type of wiki page or those types of things. Again, consistency in how we communicate and those things are going to help here. You don't want to be that person that mixes and matches and everything's hidden in different places. Try to be consistent in the way that you communicate and the medium in which you use. If things are documented, they are documented here on this Notion folder or what Notion project or whatever it is. Create consistency around that. Same with emails versus messages. Be consistent in how you communicate. Other ways that you might find consistency could be days that you come into the office or core hours that you work and you're available. And this could even be not having meetings at a certain time or having time available to discuss with stakeholders and have ad hoc meetings. All of these things are going to create more consistency. Equally, as part of our style conversation, we want to unearth how they like to communicate. And if we can stay consistent to what we agreed on during the style conversation, that of course is going to then project more consistency, project more reliability, and build more trustworthiness. You said you're going to do something, or you said that you will adapt to my needs, and you followed through on that. Other things that principles can include here are things like how decisions are made, or when workshops will be run, or who will be facilitating those workshops. Again, establishing these types of systems are all about creating more structure, and through more structure, we have more consistency in the way that we behave. By saying that we'll always get their feedback before we make a decision about X, Y, and Z, and then if we follow through on that, we have set their expectations, so they expect us to do that, and then we follow through on that, again, creating that consistency. This also goes for all the things that we've gone through inside this course. Be consistent in your showcases. Have that consistent kind of agenda that you follow. Of course, that doesn't mean that we don't tweak it and improve it over time, but that structure and consistency is going to breed more trust. Be consistent with when you hold those meetings. If you are doing them once a month, stick to it once a month. Don't have a random one pop up out of nowhere. And if you need to move it, try and move it as a last resort. But again, really stick to it. If you're sending out week notes, again, consistency in how you communicate, consistency in the format of those week notes, consistency in the sense that they are sent out every single week or twice a week or, once every 2 weeks, whatever you decide. And then a consistency again with the medium that you send it through. If you said that you're going to send it via email, make sure that your week notes are sent by email and you don't chop and change. That 1 week is sent via Slack message and another week via an email. So again, stick to it and that consistency. Again, another way that you can create more consistency in your communication is through structure. Create a structure and stick to it. Create agenda for your showcases and stick to it. This is the reason why I love the past, present, future format so much. And you can see this consistency actually come through as I have that favored model and I use it in almost all of my stakeholder communication. This means I'm coming across as more consistent, which is a proxy for reliability, which is a proxy for trustworthiness. And then the other side benefit is they come to expect that structure. They find it easier to follow and they know exactly where to go to get that information that they're looking for. My next one goes without saying, which is to just follow through on those commitments. If you say you're going to do something, then do it. This means holding yourself accountable, and through that consistency and actually following through on items, you will build more trust with your stakeholders. You can achieve this through small moments. It doesn't always have to be following through on all those big things or hitting certain milestones and delivery dates. Those things are less important. It's the consistency through small actions and small moments that are actually going to add up over time. I'll give you an example of this. You know, when we talked about the one-on-one meeting and we started those one-on-one meetings with actually cycling back to the previous meeting, checking off the action items and just providing an update on those things. That is an example of those small moments that are actually going to make the big gains and the big differences. And this doesn't mean that everything needs to be completed. It's okay that things are outstanding. Just the sheer fact that you're going back and cycling back to them is showing ownership and accountability. That you're still tracking those items. Nothing's been forgotten. Nothing's fallen into the ether of the universe. And you're really showing that leadership, ownership, and consistency through that action. So the next pillar we have is integrity. One of the key things that you want to be focused on with integrity is psychological safety. In other words, we want others to be able to feel safe enough with you to be open and honest and to entrust you with, potentially sensitive or, essentially trust you with information without fear of any adverse consequences. So we just want people to be honest with us. We want people to open themselves to us and share information with us. If we can achieve that, then people have trust in us and they have trust that we have integrity and that, again, they can share that information without any fear of any adverse consequence. The levers that I use here in order to build that psychological safety are being honest and open. I think that's a huge part of it, is just having honesty and openness, transparency, and to, again, lead by example. There's a common saying that goes, "You're like an open book." And this proverb just basically means that you don't seem to hide anything. There's nothing hiding behind the covers, that you're open and easy to read and easy to talk to. We seem to understand your feelings and what you're thinking, and you share those things freely. This is what you want to strive to be inside this pillar with integrity. You want to be an open book. We respond really well to people who come across as an open book. And the reason for that is because we don't feel like they're hiding anything. We don't feel like they're, like, why are they saying that or what are they doing this? It doesn't feel like that they have any hidden agenda, right? We also respond well to those people because we understand them, or at least we feel like we understand them. We understand them more than most people because they are an open book. They share things freely, or at least we feel like we can read their emotions and those types of things freely. So we feel like we know them better than the person who doesn't do that, who tries to hide all of those things. What we often find is suddenly find ourselves being more open and more vulnerable and more honest with these types of people. And I just want to give you a quick story on openness and transparency on this integrity thing so you can see how this kind of plays out and see how it can build trust. I worked for a startup here in Australia and I was employee roughly number 15. And one of the things that we did and the founder did was every Friday we would sit down, have an all hands with everybody together, and we'll go through all aspects of the business. We'll also do some celebrations, shout outs, birthdays, those types of things. But more importantly, we went through all aspects of the business. We talked about our pipeline from a client's point of view. This was a services company. And we talked about how much money we had in the bank, how much runway do we have, how much are we actually burning cash per month, those types of things. So everyone was aware of all of the metrics around the business. And it was completely transparent when we were doing well and when we weren't doing well. When we're saying, hey, we only have enough runway for the next 3 months. And if we don't start winning clients in the next 3 months, we are all out of a job. And now that radical transparency can seem very scary to some people. But what I saw that it did was it built trust. It strengthened us as a whole. When those moments did happen, people were all ready to put their hands up to say, how can I help? How do I get on more sales calls? How do I try and win some more clients? What activity can we do to help? Do you need me to go a week without pay or something like that? Or work part-time? People were always willing to come with solutions and be helpful. And it was beautiful because rather than having to ask them to work part-time, people were volunteering to do that. On top of that, you were galvanizing everyone in the company to work together to not fall into that situation, to get ourselves out of the pit that we were in. And this transparency and openness also bred that level of trust. I trusted that when the founder or anybody in the organization really said something to me, that they were being trustworthy in saying that. I also trusted that if they was saying something to me that wasn't great news, that they weren't hiding something else. If If they gave me positive feedback, there wasn't some negative feedback being hidden behind the scenes that they weren't willing to share with me. And if they were sharing that negative one, I know that that was the feedback and there's nothing else kind of hidden beneath the surface underneath that piece of feedback. And this is all part of that leading by example piece of the puzzle. The tricky part with psychological safety is you can't make somebody psychologically safe. Like you can't force it on them. It's completely up to them with whether they feel psychologically safe around you. Equally, this is the same with trust. And this is why we're focused on these 4 pillars and not on trust itself as an arbitrary thing. Because you can't make someone trust you. If you focus really heavily on all 4 of these pillars and you do it really, really well, and 9 out of 10 people build a stronger level of relationship and trust with you as a result of that, 1 out of 10 person, you can't like force them to trust you. Like if they just won't trust you at the end of it, that is just out of your control. And it's the same thing with psychological safety. But what we can do is we can create an environment where they feel safe with us. And the only way we can do that is by being the person who takes the first step, who leads and displays that openness and that vulnerability and that honesty that we hope to receive in return. So a trick that I do here is I share more about myself than I think most people do. And to be honest, this is a pillar that comes very naturally to me. And we'll get to that right at the end when we talk about reflection around these 4 pillars. But this is one that comes really naturally to me is because I feel like I've always just been that type of person that, I don't have anything to hide. I don't know why I would hide anything. I'm happy to share things freely about all kinds of things, right? About my family, about my life. I've even, helped other people about, sharing my contracts with what I use with my clients and those types of things, because personally, I don't see a reason to not share those things. Some people might say, but you're sharing your business secrets and they're going to then take clients from you. Well, it's a very big world, a very big market. There's a lot of clients out there. I think we can both coexist, and I'd prefer to help somebody out who's trying to, build a business and share my lessons and my learnings. And it's why I'm creating all this and why I'm sharing more things on YouTube as well freely. So just a sidebar, personally, this one's come easy to me. For others, I think, might not come easily. So just be mindful of that. Again, we're going to go through that towards the end when we do a bit of a reflection exercise. But what I do in order to really index on this pillar is I share that personal information openly. I share my interests. I share things about my family, those types of things. Now, some people might not like this, and I do run into the occasional person that doesn't like this style of chit chat or water cooler conversation. But for most people, what it does is it actually creates a stronger relationship with them. And again, I'm leading by example by being the first person to be vulnerable and open with them in the hope that they will return that. Now, there's also this really beautiful side benefit to this, which also plays into relationship management, which we do with stakeholders, and trust. I was doing this advanced facilitation course once, and they talked about relationships, and they used this analogy of imagining invisible threads between people. So like lines between people, like you've got a cord attached to somebody else. And I thought this was a really good analogy for relationships. So we got imaginary threads between each of us. And some threads are stronger than others or thicker than others. We have a stronger thread between us, which means that we have a stronger relationship. And then other threads are thinner. And then some are non-existent. Like I don't have a relationship with that person. And I thought this was a really good analogy for relationships and how relationships almost look and how they're forged over time. And one of the things that they described in this course was, as facilitators, because it was a facilitation course, was that we have to strengthen these threads between these people. And that's how we can build better, greater collaboration, teamwork, and those types of things as a facilitator. But then equally, as a product manager, I want to try and build stronger threads with my stakeholders. And my key stakeholders are people I want to have stronger threads with over others, which we can have thinner threads, right? And the side benefit that you have of sharing personal information and being an open book with your stakeholders is that you can make these threads stronger by doing so. The more we know about someone, the stronger that thread becomes because we just know more information about them. So the more we know about someone, the more we feel like we know them better because we know them better, right? And we have strong relationships with people because we know them really well, right? So the more information we can share, the more that they can get to know us, will strengthen that relationship, and also vice versa. So the more they share about themselves, the more that we will feel like we know them better. There is also a phenomenon known as affinity bias. This is basically where unconsciously we are biased towards people we are alike. So another side benefit that happens from this is that as we share that personal information and we share our interests, we often pick up likeness. So we might talk about something like our love for horse riding, or the fact that we just got a new puppy at home. And they might be a dog person, or they might be an animal person and also do horse riding. You don't know these things, right? So when you share that information, you'll occasionally pick up on these moments where they also do something similar or have a similar interest to you. And through that similar interest, we will create affinity bias, where they would then like us more than someone who doesn't share something with them. And affinity bias will work across likeness. So it could be, we look similar. It can also work off, similar backgrounds and ethnicity. It can also be those more like softer traits around interests that we share, or even having similar associations. When there's a friend of a friend, we tend to create that affinity bias because we then now associate them with that friend of ours. And as soon as we do that, immediately, as soon as we create something or introduce something that they see likeness in, affinity bias will be at work and will immediately become more likable. So to make this really tangible and really actionable for you, something that I try to do all the time, and I make this a habit, is when somebody asks me a simple, straightforward question, those typical, chit chat at the beginning of a meeting question when they say like, how was your day or how was your weekend? I don't just reply with good. I go into details. I say, well, my weekend was great, actually. We went down to the beach with my son. He loves the beach. We went swimming, those types of things, right? And as soon as we share those things, this is where we're going to pick up on those moments of likableness, and we can leverage affinity bias. Now, you might share information, again, 9 times out of 10, and there might not be anything that they can resonate with. They might not be a parent. They might not like the beach. They might not like swimming at all, to be honest. But 1 out of 10, you're going to find that there is going to be some form of likeness, and that will then inadvertently make you immediately more likable. It will leverage affinity bias. And regardless of whether you manage to leverage affinity bias, we still will strengthen those relationship threads because we've shared more information. So they now know more about us. Just take that as a simple statement. I went to the beach with my son and we went for a swim. You now know that I'm a parent, right? You now know that I have a son. He's currently 5 right now when I'm recording this video. God knows how old he'll be when some of you might be watching it. Scary to think. So I've got a son. So I'm a father, right? Then you also know that we might live close to the beach. We live relatively close to the beach. You might find out that I might like the beach. I don't like it too much, but I like swimming. So, those types of things. But you've learned a lot about me in that simple reply, as opposed to replying and saying, oh, I had a good weekend. You learned nothing about the person with a good weekend. You learned a ton about them with a vivid and more detailed answer. So something that I make a habit of is to give that more detailed and vivid answer, as opposed to just saying, I had a great weekend. And then finally, we have our last pillar, which is empathy. My number one stakeholder management tip is to empathize with your stakeholders. You're going to build more trust with your stakeholders if you can show that you're building empathy with them. Try to understand their challenges, understand their goals, their motivations, try to understand their roles better. The more you can do this, the more you're going to be able to display empathy and consequently be able to build trust with them. We tend to trust people who empathize with us, who seem to understand where we're coming from a lot better than those who don't. Those who, see stakeholders as someone that I need to say no to and just keep them at bay. Rather, I always found it more effective to see my stakeholders as partners and to invite them in, try to listen to them, try to understand their perspectives and understand their roles and how they fit into the wider picture. And it really empathize with them more, because what ends up happening is I build more trust with them. They trust me more. And then even though it's more effort up front, I'm then often trusted more and empowered more later on. So then when I do advocate for something, they're more likely to trust that advocacy and actually go with it, as opposed to not building that foundation and not doing the work up front in order to cultivate that. So a much quicker one here, but what I would like you to do is to reflect on how much empathy you have with your stakeholders today. Maybe go back to your stakeholder map, start with your key stakeholders, again, priority order, and then work your way out and just reflect on how much do you know about their roles? How much do you know about the challenges that they have and they face? Again, if you did all the steps prior that we went through in that section when we talked about meeting your stakeholders where they're at and building empathy with them, then you would have already mapped out their motivations and their challenges and those types of things. So you would have already empathized with them really well. But if you haven't done that yet, again, a really good reflection point to actually prompt yourself to then go and do that. How well do you know these things about them, their role, how their department or what they do fits inside the organization, the value that they bring, the challenges that they have, their goals and their motivations. And then actually create yourself an action list. Who are those stakeholders that maybe you don't know enough about their role? And then create an action to actually go and learn more about their role, learn more about their challenges and their motivations. Now, this can be weaved into a lot of your existing forums. Maybe you have existing one-on-ones with them. So the next one-on-one you have a few questions you'll just like to ask them about their roles, the challenges, what they think of the product, those types of things. And if not, then perhaps reach out to them. Try and set up a meeting. Reach out to them and say, hey, we haven't spoken in a long time. I'd really love to just, catch up, let you know what's happening with the product and try to understand your perspective and get your input on a few things a bit more. And of course, have something prepared, but then sit down with them and ask them their questions and try to understand their role better. What I've always found is stakeholders will always appreciate that. They'll always appreciate somebody's taken the time to understand their perspective more and to understand where they're coming from. They're always going to respect that. And if they can make the time, they will make the time for you. So that's the fundamentals of trust and how as product managers, we can go about building trust with our stakeholders. Remember that there are 4 pillars to trust, and we went through them in this section. It is competency, consistency, integrity, and empathy. View these pillars as levers that you can pull in order to build more trust with your stakeholders. As I mentioned before, you can't make somebody trust you, but what you can do is leverage these 4 parts of the equation. Try to make sure that you are building empathy with them. You are displaying integrity and being open and vulnerable. You are consistent and reliable, and you are displaying a level of confidence and competency in your role. Through those things, that is going to start to build and cultivate that trust. And eventually it will come. It might not come for everyone, but eventually it will generally come for most people. As one final reflection that I would love you to do as part of this section that I alluded to just earlier when we were talking about integrity, was to reflect on these 4 pillars themselves. I want you to take a moment and I want you to just reflect on which of these 4 pillars do you believe you are the strongest in? Which one of these 4 pillars come the most naturally to you? I mentioned in the section in integrity that integrity was the one for me. Creating that social connection and building those steel threads with people is actually something that I find, at least personally, comes quite naturally to me. I find it easy to be an open book. I find it easy to build those relationships with people. This is something that comes quite naturally to me. But equally, other people might find it easier to sympathize and empathize and listen to their stakeholders and build that empathy, right? And others might find it really good to just speak with confidence and have that confident demeanor. We've always run into those people that just come across as overly confident and they're confident in the things they do, and they just got this demeanor about them. So I want you to just pause and reflect here. Which of these 4 pillars do you think comes the most naturally and the easiest to you? Which one of these 4 do you think you are the strongest in? Now I want you to flip the equation. Now I want you to reflect on which of these 4 pillars is the one that comes the least natural to you. Which one is the hardest? Which one do you think you might struggle to do compared to the other 3? For me, on this one, it's the consistency one. I am not that great, and I know I need to work on it. And this is one of the reasons why I use techniques like time blocking to block out time in order to send those week notes. Because if I don't block out that time, I will not be consistent with my week notes. I know it. The hardest one for me is that consistency. I'm terrible at following up in emails after meetings, all those types of things. And I'm aware of it, so I put more deliberate effort into that pillar inside trust, and I put less deliberate effort into something like integrity because I can build those relationships a lot more easier. What I'm trying to achieve with this reflection is just to build some self-awareness around those 4 pillars for you. Which is the one that you're going to need to be more conscious of that put a conscious effort in and make sure that you're not letting slip, versus what are the ones that you might be able to just put on autopilot a little bit. So really good to create that self-awareness. Self-awareness is a pillar to emotional intelligence, and it's something that is going to set us up for success, especially in adaptive leadership and just being better product people as a whole. So just a quick exercise around those 4 pillars of trust. And that's it. That's the fundamentals of trust as a foundation. If you're looking for more in-depth into these sections, and in particular, check out the Advanced Stakeholder Management course, as well as the Conflict Resolution course. And I'll probably have more courses in the future that are actually deep diving into, relationship building in particular and trust, I suspect. Let me know if you want courses like that. Feel free to just reach out, email, or hit me up on kind of the socials. I'm always looking for feedback and guidance and input into what courses to work on next. So I would highly encourage it. But for now, check out the Advanced Stakeholder Management one and the Conflict Resolution. We'll go deeper into trust and managing these types of things.